Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I see we've got Carolyn Livingston with us. We've got Jean Neely. We've got Carmen Sandy. Welcome. I'm sure there's some other folks will be coming in. Please be sure to say hi to us. Hey, there's Dick and Nardine. Let us know where you're chiming in from. If you're comfortable saying the city you're in. If not, just say I'm tuning in from the kitchen or the dining room or the living room or wherever it is you're sitting right now. So, tonight we're going to be talking about the story of how Jacob cheated his twin brother Esau. We're taking a survey of the Bible, one story at a time. Each week we're going to hear one new critical Bible story. I strongly suggest reading it beforehand. I will send you the paraphrasing that I'm going to be using. If you give me your email address, you'll generally get those emails on Fridays. If you haven't gotten it by Saturday morning, shoot me an email and say, hey, where's my email? That might mean that I'm running behind schedule. Anyway, when you get those emails, you can always respond with any questions you've got, or you can just shoot me an email saying you've got questions or anything you want to see me talk about in the future. You can also put questions in the chat over here. I see that Tony Hayes is with us. I see that Jean is in the living room, probably on her iPad, if I know her. All right, so if you fall behind on the lessons or if you've missed any, the easiest place to find them is on my YouTube channel. If you click subscribe, that'll make it even easier. Those of you who have, I recommend that everybody have a YouTube account. I resisted doing that for many years, but now that I've got one and I've subscribed to different channels, it's great to be able to go on and see whatever channels have updated over the course of the day. Rob and Tony and Jean there. Hey, good to have you guys with us tonight. All right, let's go ahead and start with, and there's Kayleen. Let's open with a word of prayer, shall we? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, for you alone are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. All right, so tonight's story, it's kind of fun, it's kind of sad. It's fun because it's amazing the things that people are willing to try and get away with. Sad that they do. All right, so here we go. We are with Jacob and Esau, moving on through Genesis chapter 27, verses 1 through 45. Listen for the word of the Lord. When Isaac was old, he went blind. He called out to his oldest son Esau and said, "My son?" Esau replied, "Here I am." Isaac said, "Look, I'm old. I don't know how much time I have left. So get your bow, go out to the field, and get some wild game. Make the food I love and bring it to me. After I eat, I will bless you before I die." Rebekah overheard Isaac talking to Esau. When Esau went out to hunt, Rebekah had a talk with Jacob. She said, "I heard your father talking to Esau. He said, 'Bring me some wild game, and I will bless you in the Lord's presence before I die.' So do what I say. Go to the flock right now and get 2 good young goats. I'll make it taste like the food your father loves. Take it to him so that he will bless you before he dies." Jacob said, "But Esau is a hairy man, and I am not. What if he touches me? He'll think I'm mocking him. I'll end up bringing a curse on myself instead of a blessing." His mother said, "The curse will be on me. Just do what I say." He went and got the goats. His mother made his father's favorite food. Rebekah then took Esau's clothes and put them on Jacob. She put the goat's skins on his hands and neck so he would seem hairy. Then she gave him the food and some bread she had baked. He came to Isaac and said, "Father?" He said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Jacob said, "I'm Esau, your firstborn. I've done what you asked. Sit up and eat, so you can bless me." Isaac said, "How did you find it so quickly?" He said, "Because the Lord your God gave me success." Isaac said, "Please let me touch you, so I can see whether you really are Esau." Jacob got close to his father. Isaac felt him and said, "You've got Jacob's voice, but Esau's hands." He didn't recognize him and asked, "Are you really my son Esau?" He said, "I am." Isaac said, "Bring the food to me so I can eat your wild game and bless you." Jacob brought it to him and he ate. He brought him wine, and he drank. His father said to him, "Come and kiss me, my son." When Isaac kissed Jacob, he smelled Esau's clothing. He blessed him and said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of the sky, the fat of the land, and plenty of grain and wine. May the peoples serve you, and the nations bow before you. Be lord over your brothers. May your mother's sons bow before you. May those who curse you be cursed. May those who bless you be blessed." As soon as Jacob left, Esau came in from his hunt. He cooked the game, brought it to his father, and said, "Sit up and eat, so you can bless me." Isaac asked, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm your firstborn, Esau." Isaac shook with rage and said, "Then who was it that just brought me wild game? I ate it just before you came in, and I gave him your blessing." When Esau heard this, he let out a great and bitter cry. He said, bless me too, father." Isaac said, "Your brother has been deceitful and has stolen your blessing." Esau said, "The name Jacob fits him, because he's supplanted me twice now. First, he took my birthright. Now he's taken my blessing. Don't you have another blessing you can give me?" Isaac answered, "I've already made him your lord, and I made all his brothers his servants. I made him wealthy with grain and new wine. So what can I do for you?" Esau pleaded and wept. "You must have another blessing. Bless me too, father." Isaac answered him, "You will live far from the fat of the land and the dew of the sky. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But there will come a day when you will break free, and you will shake his yoke from your neck." Esau hated Jacob for stealing his father's blessing. He said to himself, "After I have mourned the death of my father, I will kill my brother." Esau's plan was overheard, and it got back to Rebekah. She called for Jacob and said to him, "Your brother plans to avenge himself by killing you. So now do what I say. Run to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him until your brother calms down and forgets what you did to him. I'll send for you. Why should I lose both of you in one day?" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Sandy Crush has joined us. Hello, Sandy. Good to have you with us tonight. My goodness, what a story. Things people do to each other. Close family, no less. When I was a kid, my mother and my grandmother, when I was little, my mother was a homemaker up until I went to middle school. I think she stayed home. She had worked before I was born. She went back to work after, but at that point she was a homemaker, and she and her mother, my grandmother, they watched Days of Our Lives every day while they were my mom was usually folding clothes or sorting clothes. I know that my grandmother was usually crocheting that time of day. And during the summer months, I would sit and watch with them. And I will confess that I got hooked. I don't think any of my other brothers were ever interested in any of this, I guess because they were younger. But yeah, I got hooked on all the storylines and everything. And during the school year, I'd ask them how things were going. And my mom would call my grandmother after the show each day and talk about what had happened. And I loved the melodrama of these crazy storylines, and especially surrounding the big life events like weddings and funerals. In they were always suspenseful because you just knew it wasn't going to go right. Something was going to go wrong. There was going to be some sort of absurd event that was going to take place in the run-up to a wedding or a funeral or afterwards. And one of the most common tropes that you saw and you still see in TV shows and movies to this day, even though soaps are pretty much gone, is the reading of the will after a main character has died. And of course it's usually an event because the person was wealthy. So they've gathered everybody together in this oak paneled room that's supposed to be the attorney's office, and he pulls out the will, and the will has always been sealed, and it seems that even the attorney doesn't even know what. It seems like even the attorney is in the dark as to what's in it sometimes, which shouldn't be the case. The attorney should have helped to write it. And then, of course, there's always some big surprise, something that enrages everybody. Oftentimes, the person who has died has left the lion's share of their estate to somebody that nobody in the family has ever heard of. Or sometimes there's an epilogue and another will has been found, one that's newer, one that was written by hand, with a shaky hand, shortly before the death of the character when his competence was now in question. Yeah, these are the kinds of storylines that you saw on Days of Our Lives and other kinds of, and the evening stuff too. My parents watched Dallas and Who Shot JR and all that stuff. Hey, Sarah, why am I talking about all this nonsense? Okay, years later when I became a pastor, I found out that these absurd types of stories are not as far-fetched as I thought they were. Because although weddings and funerals bring out the best in most people, there is a minority, but a large minority, of people in whom it brings out the worst in human behavior. And dysfunctional families sometimes go off the rails at weddings or at funerals or in the run-up to a funeral or when estates are being discussed. And in my personal experience, the wealthier the family is, the more likely something like this is to happen around the estate. Of course, when it happens in real life, the melodrama is no longer entertaining. It's just sad. But apparently this phenomenon is not unique to the Western world or to the modern world. This kind of thing goes back to the earliest days of human civilization. Every culture has its own way of dealing with family estates, and it varies dramatically from one region of the world to another. Even here in the United States, the laws. Jean says she's in no danger. Even in the United States, the laws between one state and the state right next door, when it comes to probate court and estate planning, everything, the laws can be very different. It matters where you file your will and everything. So, public service announcement: do not write your own will. Even if you think it's simple and you can do it yourself, you need to have an attorney involved in that. It'll save everybody a lot of pain and suffering down the road. But of course, in the world of Genesis, there were no written wills and there were no courthouses to file them in. So instead, the few people who actually owned things of value worth passing on to the next generation, they would make their will known by conferring final blessings upon their heirs shortly before their death. And that's what is happening in this story here. I never understood that as a young man or as a kid hearing this story. I thought, the guy was tricked. Does it still count, Now, the interesting thing is, so these final blessings were irrevocable, and they were irrevocable because of the nature of what they were. What the wishes of the deceased were has to be beyond dispute. So the normal way to do it would be that all the kids would be gathered together for the final blessing or blessings, and they would all hear the same words, and ideally you'd have some other witnesses there as well. And none of that is happening in this story. And the reason that none of that is happening is because Isaac does not want Jacob and Rebekah to know what he is doing. Now, even if this had gone according to his plan, this probably would have caused problems for Esau, because Esau would not have any witnesses to back up his claim, except, of course, God. And that is God's major role in this. We'll get back to that in just a minute. So what we see here is more dysfunction. Isaac and Rebekah are not on the same page as to what should happen when Isaac dies. So so they're both trying to outmaneuver each other, and of course Rebekah ends up having the upper hand on that, partly because Isaac has gone blind, and partly I think because she's sharper with these things than he is. So Isaac undoubtedly knows that Esau has already sold his birthright to Jacob. So in his final blessing, Isaac is going to try and undo that sale, reestablishing Esau as the next head of the household and head of the clan. But Rebekah and Jacob engage in this very elaborate deception, which amazingly tricks Isaac and cements Jacob's future. So Esau is understandably enraged by what has happened, and he decides he's going to kill his own brother. I think I can actually understand somebody saying something like that in a time like this. It's not a great plan. It's not going to solve any problems. Historically, though, that is often how things play out. I mean, I've actually known people who tried to kill people for much less than that. But it doesn't happen. Jacob runs for his life, and he will end up being gone for a very long time. Isaac tries to mitigate the effects of this deception, and he gives Esau a new blessing. What I'd love to know, and what we don't know, is what was married life between Isaac and Rebekah after this? There are some more conversations that we're going to hear. Not many more. Isaac's not going to be around a whole lot longer. But I just can't imagine being married to somebody who would plot like that. Either one of them, because, Isaac is working behind Rebekah's back, and Rebekah's working behind Isaac's back, and the stakes are pretty high. What does this story tell us about God? And this is the interesting thing, of course, is that God doesn't actually do anything actively in this story. He only does one thing, which is to serve as a witness, which is implied. He says he's going to give his blessing before God. So God is the only witness to this. So what that tells us about Isaac is that Isaac thinks that's all he needs. So it tells us more about us, I think, than it tells us about God in this story. Now we're going to hear more about God in the very near future as the rest of this story plays out. But Isaac believes that God as his witness is all he is going to need to make this blessing stick. And this blessing is going to stick. It's just not going to stick the way he wanted it to stick because he gave it to the wrong person. What does this story tell us about ourselves beyond that? Well, this is a similar theme to last week. My dad used to have a bumper sticker on his workbench in the basement. I don't know why we call them workbenches or tables. Workbench is a bench is something you sit on, but our workbench was clearly a table. I don't know if we were alone in misusing it. Anyway, he had a bumper sticker on his workbench that said, "Insanity is hereditary. You get it from your kids." I don't know about that, but dysfunction definitely runs through families. Hey, Mike just finished his trustees meeting. So Mike's decompressing on the way home from church, no doubt. Dysfunction ripples through families. You can get it from your kids. If a dysfunctional kid is dysfunctional enough, whether he's a minor or an adult, that dysfunction can ripple out through the family. It can ripple sideways, laterally through siblings of the same age, cousins of the same age. You can rattle your predecessors. You can rattle your descendants. Dysfunction has a way of spreading like a cancer if it is not dealt with, and it is not dealt with in this story at all. So what does this story tell us about our relationship then with God? I'm going to have to give you a little bit of a sneak peek here in saying that God does not abandon any of the people in this story. These people are behaving spectacularly badly. Jacob, in particular. Now, yeah, his mom's putting him up to it, but he's the one that actually carries it out and pulls one over on his dad. And what you're going to see now, Jacob is the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, the rest of the story is going to be the story of the rest of Genesis is going to be the story of Jacob and his sons. Jacob's the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, and as my Old Testament professor said, Jacob is a rat. He is just a rat. There isn't a single decision he makes that is clearly, purely motivated. There are some decisions that he's going to make down the road that maybe he was trying to do the right thing, but you could argue it either way. There are many things he's going to do that it's absolutely clear that he was once again trying to pull something over on somebody. This is how he operates. And yet God is going to stick through him. And he's got a good relationship with God. Don't get me wrong. He talks to God, and God talks to him. But, talking with God and following God are not the same thing. A lot of people who, I shouldn't say a lot. It's certainly true of me sometimes. We talk to God a lot, and we think we're sensing what God wants us to do. That does not mean that we're cooperating. It does not mean that our motives are pure. It does not mean that even when we do the right thing, are we doing it because God asked us to, or are we doing it because we think we can work an angle on this? Jacob's always looking for an angle. And when he finally gets a new name from God, his personality will be included in that name. All right, so that's it for our story this evening. Let's take a look at news. Interesting things going on in the Methodist world this week. The United Methodist Church's annual conference in Bulgaria and Romania has announced they have voted at their meeting of their annual conference. They will be disaffiliating from the United Methodist Church and joining the Global Methodist Church on May 1st. Now, the Judicial Council has yet to decide whether or not annual conferences can secede from the denomination as a whole conference, but apparently that decision only relates to annual conferences in the United States. The annual conferences, and I knew the annual conferences in other parts of the world were under a different portion of the discipline, different category, and so forth. What I did not realize is that they have baked in, apparently, the ability to disaffiliate if they want to and join another denomination. So they have announced that they are going to be doing that. In the meantime, here in the United States, we're waiting for a Judicial Council decision that will let us know whether we know that congregations can secede. There was a paragraph put in the discipline in 2019. So if you have a 2016 discipline, you're not going to find it in there because it was printed before this amendment was passed at the special conference of 2019. So this new paragraph that was created in 2019 allows congregations the ability to withdraw. It was passed as a stopgap measure since we had no protocol in place yet to allow congregations to. The protocol, we didn't have a protocol. The previous plan had not, had gone haywire. The traditionalist plan was passed. So it was a big mess. This paragraph was put in to allow congregations to leave in a very imperfect way. The original paragraph was written by centrists who were thinking that there might be progressives that would want to leave, depending on what happened in 2019. At the last minute, though, the minority port, which was written by conservatives, replaced it. So the legislation that finally passed was put in by conservatives, and those conservatives are no longer satisfied with the paragraph that they wrote. They don't think it's fair anymore, although they're the ones that wrote it. And in fact, I remember very clearly because I was there. One of the people say, "Oh, I'm getting a spinny thing." One of the people, the sponsor of the Minority Report, said, "If I were leaving the church, this is how I would want to be treated." And now they're saying that's not how they want to be treated. Well, they wrote it. So anyway, so so we know that congregations can secede using this paragraph, and there are certain minimum requirements that need to be met. Conferences can add additional requirements. Only a couple of them are doing that. Most conferences are trying to make it as easy as possible for congregations to leave if they want to, including ours. In fact, I believe our bishop is meeting with representatives from the Wesley Covenant Association this evening, talking about such things. But the paragraph does not directly address whole annual conferences. And there are 2 whole annual conferences talking about leaving, one in Texas and one in Florida. So here's what we know about that. So far, we think we've lost somewhere between 130 and 150 congregations due to withdrawal from the denomination over these issues. Somewhere between 130 and 150 over the last couple years since 2019. There will be more, certainly there will be more. But to put that in perspective, we have 31,000 churches. And every year we close about 280 churches. In recent years, we've closed on average 280 churches per year because they are no longer able to function because they've gotten so small. So putting it in context, in that context, it's not a large number of congregations that we have lost, although a couple of them have been some of our larger congregations. But the largest congregations have no intention of leaving. I know that there is a misconception that all of our biggest churches are conservative. That's not true. Our biggest churches, half are conservative, half are not. And the half that are not are, most of them are fairly centrist. The one in Atlanta is pretty progressive. Anyway, so congregations will leave. I know some people think a lot of congregations will leave. Well, according to the WCA's own website, there are only 13 WCA chapters in the Baltimore-Washington Conference. There's only 3 in the Peninsula Delaware Conference. I don't think all of those 16 total churches, I don't think all of them will be able to muster the 2/3 majority that they would need to exit the denomination. A couple of them will. I know a couple of them will. A couple of them are pretty united on this, but they are not all. In fact, there are churches in which the WCA faction, although there is a chapter there, they are actually a minority opinion. Now, one person I was chatting with today says, yeah, but there's a lot of congregations that are not officially WCA, but they're sort of in the closet, which I find ironic. Yeah, I don't know that that's true. I know that they all want to believe that they've got more support than they have on paper, but I have not seen any evidence to support that. So what would happen if an entire conference were to leave? Jeremy Smith, the guy he's a ridiculously progressive blogger on hackingchristianity.net. I disagree with him about a lot of things, but he's had a lot of valuable insight on this topic. And he's very good at math. He's always crunching numbers and looking up reports and figuring things out. And he says that the unfunded pension liability, one of the conditions that congregation has to meet to leave the denomination is they have to pay out, buy out their portion of the unfunded pension liability of the denomination. So the pastors who retired prior to 1980, we had an old school pension plan that was just paid directly out of the budget of the annual church. It wasn't funded by a fund that was created of people putting money in as they went. I'm in a hybrid system myself. There was another system that was in between, that was a funded pension. Now we're part funded pension. Now we're part 401k. But anyway, so there are still pastors alive who are retired, who are on the old pension plan that still has to be maintained through budgetary contribution, funded by the annual budget of the church. And that unfunded liability is about $3.25 billion for our denomination. So when a congregation leaves, they have to pay out their portion of it. Well, if a conference were to leave, that would mean the conference would have to pay out that portion instead of the congregations in it, or at least all of the congregations together. So if, for example, Texas were to leave, like they're talking about doing, they would have to sell, their buyout would be about $79 million. Texas doesn't have $79 million sitting in a bank account that they can just, and of course, they're talking about doing it in payments over a certain number of years, but even then, even if you spread it out over 4 or 5 years, they're not going to be able to pay $79 million unless they sell off a lot of assets. So if they were to do that, they could probably pull it off, but by then, there's going to be so little left of the actual annual conference structure that you no longer have something that can function as an annual conference the way we have had annual conferences function here traditionally in Methodism. So if the only way to get a conference out as a whole is to then liquidate it, what on earth is the point of taking a conference out as a whole? And I don't think that they have an end game strategy on that. I think it hasn't occurred to them that this isn't workable. They seem to have these rose-colored glasses on that they think everything's just going to work out. As soon as they leave, they're going to have all this money and all these people because they're not paying their apportionments anymore, and everybody's going to be happy and it's all going to be great. And they don't seem to have a clue of the liability they were opening themselves up to here. My humble opinion. I could be wrong. Part of me hopes I am wrong because I don't want to see anybody suffer, and I think that there's a lot of people in the pews that are just going with the flow on this, and I don't want to see them ending up getting stuck either. So, Mike, hopefully this is an issue. I shouldn't just say Mike. Hopefully this is an issue that none of our extended Methodist friends will have to deal with in their trustees meetings anytime in the near future. Actually, it's not even a trustees issue. The paragraph requires a church conference be called if a congregation wants to leave. A church conference is like a charge conference, except every full member in good standing who shows up has a vote. So those are always... those are melodramatic because which way the vote goes depends on who shows up for the meeting. It's a get your faction out kind of a thing. All right, enough about that. Until next week, don't forget to email me any questions that you may have. And of course, we used to do on prayer concerns quite a bit. We haven't done so much of that lately, but we are still open to that. If you have any prayer concerns, please be sure to send those out to us. Had a couple of deaths in the extended congregation this past week. Jim Harrison passed. Diane Sandish's mother, I understand, passed this morning. Haven't touched base with her yet. So going into Holy Week, we're going to have a lot of families going through a lot of different things. So please keep everybody in your prayers. And of course, continue to pray for the people in the Ukraine and for the families of the Russian soldiers who have been sent into the Ukraine. I saw this week that some of the recent conscripts were basically drafted and sent directly to the war. They were not given any training. They were given World War II era rifles and are basically being used as cannon fodder to draw the fire of the Ukrainian forces while the trained soldiers flank. And that's just... Anyway, please keep them all in your prayers. Let us pray tonight. God, give us all the grace to accept with serenity the things that we cannot change, the courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to know the one from the other. Help us to live one day at a time. Help us to enjoy one moment at a time. Help us to accept suffering as the path to peace. Help us to take, as Jesus did, this world as it is, not as we would have it be. Help us to trust that you will make all things right if we surrender to your will. Help us to be happy in this life, reasonably happy, and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. All right, brothers and sisters, thank you for joining this evening, and I'll see you all next week. Of course, there'll be worship services between now and then. God bless, my friends.